Okay.
Those rules of license really only apply to them.
Doesn't. Seems to me.
Now it's 3. No, it's
Coming in next hour. Oh, when they change the clock.
Wait.
Huh.
Oh, so far away.
We're at the Mishnah, right?
Yeah.
I'm Lamed Vav, 36A. Mishnah. We think Hashem, we're able to learn Torah every day. We're learning Hashem to do some English immediately. Okay. My parents are coming in today. My father's coming. Maybe I'll be at the share tomorrow. So let's see. Yeah. So, okay, so the Mishnah begins like this. Asmiches means the leaning on the animal, what's done before it's sacrificed, and it's a confession that's done while it's leaning on it. Batanufes is the waving of different offerings. Ba'agashis is bringing the offerings close to the corner of the mizbeach. Ba'kmitzes is the scoopful that's done in the flour and then the oil. You use 3 fingers, you stick it in. Va'aktaris, in the offering of, literally means the smoking of, but it means the offering of the onto the altar. Ba'malikes is the incision that's done through the back of the neck with the fingernail of the Kohen. Ba'kabolas, and receiving the blood. Ba'azais, and the sprinkling of the blood. Na'yigim ba'nashim v'lei b'nashim. That was our whole point. It only applies to men, not to women. That's because that's the continuation of the other Mishnayos. We said Mitzvah Seishas Man Grama, right? We got into like what applies to men, what to women. Okay, we're continuing on with that topic. Except for the offering of a Saita woman, which is a suspected adulteress, and the Nazira is a woman that became a Nazir. She accepted on herself, not to drink wine and to let her hair grow. Shehin menifais, that they are going to do the waving of their sacrifice. The Gemara is going to go through all the different verses. How do we know this? That it only applies to men and not to women. So it starts with smichas tiksiv dabrel b'nei Yisrael v'samach, speak to the children of Israel, and they should lean on the animal. Well, it says b'nei Yisrael semchan b'nei Yisrael same place. It's only the sons of good morning. Sons of the Jewish people and not the daughters. Okay, tenufais, the waving. Dabrel b'nei Yisrael v'heinif, speak to the b'nei Yisrael and wave. B'nei Yisrael menifin, vein b'nei Yisrael menifais. It's only the sons of Israel and not the daughters of Israel. Hagashes, the bringing close to the altar. It says Zayster semincha hakraves b'nei Aaron v'nei b'nei San. The sons of Aaron bring close, and not the daughters of Aaron. Kmitzes, that means in the base of English, you're not going to have women kayanim doing the service. It's only going to be the sons. Kmitzes doing that, the scoopful. He brings the mincha to the sons of Aaron, and then he does the scoopful. It's the sons of Aaron, not the daughters of Aaron. Aktaris, the offering on the altar. It will be offered on the altar by the sons of Aaron, not by the daughters of Aaron. What about the incision that's done by the fingernail? It would be better if the ladies would do it. They can have a nice long fingernail. And the ksiv, it says a malak v'hikter. Iskish malika aktara. It says that it'll do the malika and then it'll offer it up. Malika is the incision. There's a comparison that's done between the offering and that cut that's done on the back of the neck. Well, just like the offering up is done only by the sons of Aaron, so too that type of shchita. It's not a shchita. It's called malika. Push the fingernail through the back of the neck of the bird. It's only on a bird, and so that's only done by sons of Aaron. It's not done by daughters of Aaron. Only by Kayan. Sorry? Kabbalis, the receiving of the blood. The sons of Aaron will bring close from Amar, and the master taught it was taught in the Brisa. The krivzu kabbalah sadam, the bringing close, is actually receiving the blood in a vessel after the shechita. They hold the vessel under it and receive it. Ba'azois, the sprinkling. Now, the word for sprinkling is usually zrika. Here it's using the word hazah. Hazah is not the common word. Hazah is used in certain instances. The Gemara says, hazah dehecha, which hazah are you referring to? Id para, are you talking about the hazah that's done of the para duma? You know who does that? Elazar ksivba, it's done by Elazar. It says by the Sagan Kayan. Elazar is the one. I think there's machlekes if every paraduma had to be done by the Sagan, the deputy Kayan Gadol. But whatever the case is, it says that it's not going to be by a woman. So idipnim, and if we're talking about the sprinkling of the blood that's done inside the chamber, inside the heichal, which is done on certain sacrifices, if the Sanhedrin makes a mistake or if the Kayan Gadol does a sin or something like that, it says Hakayin Mashiach Ksivba. Over there it says only the anointed Kayan, which is referring to the Kayan Gadol.
And therefore what?
It's not talking about, of course it's not women.
It's not talking about men or women.
Of course it's not women. If it's only the Kayan and Mashiach, if it's only Elazar, this can't be a woman.
So you're saying what was Abba mean?
Right. Why do we need to even mention this? It says Ella Hazad de Ben Aif. Must be talking about the sprinkling of a bird. No. Okay. Why doesn't it just say a regular sacrifice? The reason is because regular sacrifice they would have used the term zrika. We're looking for where the term hazah is used. That would be by word. We can learn it from a regular sacrifice, from a sheep. Remember that a kayan doesn't need to do the shechita of a karban. You're allowed to use anyone to do the shechita. The kayan only takes over by the receiving of the blood. But nevertheless, but a kayan has to do the sprinkling. When it comes to the bird, that the kayan is the one that does the shechita. He doesn't do shechita, he does malika. Which is through the back of the neck. Is it not kal v'chaymer that the kayan? In other words, the process already began with the kayan from the very beginning. So of course it's going to be by a kayan and not by a lady. Okay.
Oh, a lady.
A lady kayan. Except for minchas chayte, I'm sorry, minchas saita, not a minchas chayte, minchas saita and nazira. The saita and the nazira are going to do waving, even though they're women, and they're going to do the waving as the owner of the sacrifice. There's different types of waving. Some is by the kohen, some is by the owner. Yeah, the Gemara is going to mention that. Says Amalei Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yeshua Dedari. Rabbi Lazar, it says Eliezer in my Gemara, but on the side it's corrected. It's Elazar. Rabbi Lazar, here says Elazar. Rabbi Lazar says to Rabbi Yeshua of his generation. Rashi says that there was a Rabbi Yeshua in his generation, but there was a Rabbi Yeshua in an earlier generation. Rashi says that this proves that the Rabbi Yeshua from the earlier generation was still alive. That's why it has to say that he's saying this comment to Rabbi Yeshua, the young. Now, why is that so significant? Because the comment that he says would be derogatory to an older sage. It says like Tesev Akarach, don't sit on your chair. Karach means your legs, like your legs. Don't sit on your legs. I guess they would sit on the floor probably. Until you tell me the following halacha, the teaching. How do we know that a mincha seita requires to be waved? The meal offering that's done from barley that the seita brings. How do you know that it needs to be waved? Wave means that it's moved around like a lulav to the different directions
Just before she drinks.
Yeah. Had a whole discussion on when they bring the mincha. Is it before they dissolve the thing? There was a whole thing in well, it says Minalan, he's surprised even by the question. You're asking a question? It says in the Torah, you have to wave the mincha. How do you know that the owners need to waive it, which means that the woman needs to do it? We say asi yad yad mishlamim. We learn it from a verbal analogy from Shlomo. It says by the saita, the kohen takes it from the hands of the woman. And it says over there yad of Tiviana, his hands bring it. Ma kan kohen aflalan kohen. Just like over here it's the kohen, so to over there it's the kohen. And malahalan bebailim, just like over there, it's the owners that are doing it as well. Afkan bebailim, back to the saita, it's going to be the woman as well that's going to do it. Okay, said, how does that work? Kayan machnas yadi tachas yad bailim. The kayan puts his hand under the hands of the owner. Umainif, and he waves it. Okay, ashkechan saitin minalan sugazan. How do we know that a nazira, a woman that's a nazir, how do we know the same thing applies? Ashi kaf kaf misaita. We have a verbal analogy to learn it from saita. If it's done by the saita, that the owner does it by the saita, it's the woman. So too by the nazira, the owner, which is the nazira, female nazir, also does the waving. Okay, next Mishnah says, Kol mitzvah shi taluya ba'aretz ein nehegasel ba'aretz. Any mitzvah that's dependent on the land of Israel, so it's only done in the land of Israel. If it's not dependent on the land of Israel, then it applies outside Israel as well. Yeah. You could think that maybe you only have to keep all the mitzvahs in Israel. You know, it's the land outside of Israel. Yeah. There's a Rashi that says, Rashi in Parshas Vayim Shemaya, it says he brings a verse, that you should keep the laws even outside of Israel, so that you should have practice when you go back. You should still make, Rashi says that. And they want to say that, oh, that means that it's not really you're not really obligated outside of Israel. You're just doing it for practice. So when you go back, the real mitzvah is in Israel. I saw a comment on that it says you should keep the tefillin umezuzah outside of Israel. It says tough vav mem tefillin umezuzah outside of Israel. And the comment was that it was actually, it says tefillin umezuzah, but it was really supposed to say something else. It was supposed to say trumas u'maisros. Now the rules of trumas u'maisros, which are only apply in Israel, was saying that you should keep them outside of Israel, so that when you go back, you'll have so though anyway. Then for sure inside we should. That would be for sure in Israel you have to keep. Yeah, we're talking about outside of Israel. Are you obligated to do all the mitzvahs? So if it's only because of practice, then it sounds a little weird. Okay. Anyway, chutz min ha'arla v'kelayim. There's an exception here. The exception is that there are certain laws that apply to the land, and nevertheless they apply outside of Israel as well. Arla, the first 3 years of a fruit tree, be careful not to eat the first fruits. Why is it that you're allowed to go to the store and buy a fruit? You don't need a mashgiach to tell you that it's not Arla. The reason is because we're in Chutz La'aretz. And we're going to learn later that Suffolk Arla and Chutz La'aretz is allowed.
What if I always wondered, what if you're like a lot or something?
And you had a problem. You don't buy.
No, but
You
what
don't
is
have the right certificate.
No, but he's asking in those little cities, those areas that are not Israel proper, like Eilat or something. What is it considered Eretz Yisrael or not? Plus, you have to.
But even there, they're getting it from. It's not that they grew it. They're getting it from Israel.
So in Israel, you have to be careful. Yes, someone told us they went to Israel and they were going through the conversion process. They said, so what did you do about the hechsherim in Israel? They said, oh, I only ate fruits and vegetables. Like, no, that's the one thing in Israel you can't eat. In America, it's like, I only eat fruits and vegetables. That's like, okay, maybe it was kosher. In Israel, you're in trouble. Yeah, we always have a trouble with Jaffa oranges because they're imported, and it's always a problem. Dates sometimes also. Okay, but chutz min ha'arla the kilayim. Kilayim is a forbidden mixture. Also applies outside of Israel. And Rabbi Eliezer Aimer Afa Chadash. Rabbi Eliezer says also Chadash. Now Chadash means the new grain. You familiar with this concept of Chadash? What happens is like this. There's a law that you're not allowed to eat the new grain. In other words, if you have grain, you can't use the new grain until you use up the old grain. No, it's not really what it says. You can't use the new grain until the second day of Pesach, which is the day the Omer is brought. The counting of the Omer begins from the sacrifice of the Omer, which is on the 16th of Nisan.
Is this related to
Kemach Yashan, exactly. So until then, until the 16th of Nisan, it's called Chadash. New grain is new. You're not allowed to eat it. You have to wait until it becomes Yashan. And that's what it says on some things. Kemach Yashan, the flour. So now there's a big question if it applies outside the land of Israel. It's machlekes in the Mishnah, right? Rabbi Eliezer, well, we'll see in the Gemara what Rabbi Eliezer is saying. But let's say Rabbi Eliezer is saying l'chumra. You see, whenever you have the Gemara is going to discuss this in a moment. But whenever you have a rule, and then you say with the exception of. Okay, so but you have a rule, you have to say the exception of, and then you say someone adds in also something else. So is he adding it to the exception or is he adding it to the rule? Which one is he adding? That's confusing. When Rabbi Eliezer says Afa Chadash, also Chadash, is he saying that also has to that also applies outside of Israel, or it also doesn't apply outside of Israel? But is he adding it to the Tanakama? Onto what they said? Well, whatever the case is, this we'll see in the Gemara. Okay, my taliya, my shena taliya. What do you mean when you said things that are dependent on the land? Okay, you really have to be familiar with the verses here because a lot of the mitzvahs say when you come into the land. When you come into the land, you're going to do this. When you come into the land, you're going to do that. So when you said that the mitzvahs that apply in the land of Israel, is that because we opened up the Chumash and we looked at each of the verses and it says when you come into the land, you have to do this? So the problem is, by tefillin it says when you come into the land, right? Right? When you come into the land, it talks about the tefillin. And also petach hamar, which is in that same portion, talks about to redeem the firstborn of the donkey. You redeem it by exchanging it with the sheep, right? So over there it says you're coming into the land. And Rashi says, and we know that it applies in Chutz Laretz because there were Amoraim that wore tefillin in Chutz Laretz. Tosfos says maybe it was only midrabanan that they wore tefillin in Chutz Laretz. So he says, but 1 second, the Mishnah is talking about even midrabanan. Because when it says chutz min ha'arla, it's not talking about midarais, it's talking about midarabanan. So obviously the whole thing is midaraban. So things that are dependent in the land would have to be that it's even including it's obligated, things that are dependent on land are obligated to do only in Israel, would be even midarabanan obligated only in Israel. The problem is, what about tefillin and petach hamar? Well, the Gemara adjusts it. Rav Yehuda says, Hachi Kamar. What the Mishnah means to say is, Kol mitzvah shichai vasaguf, anything that's an obligation on the body. That would be Shabbos, tefillin, anything, Mila, prohibited things, all of that. So, all of that is Naihegas Bein Bar Bein B'chutzlaris. That applies.
Even if it says,
well, now we're going to get into soon the Gemara is going to discuss that. Yeah. But in Chayvas Karka, but if it has to do with the land, anything that's agricultural laws, it only applies to the land of Israel. Okay. For example, the Chumas and Meisers and Chala and Leket and Shekha and Peya and Shvias and Chadash and Arla and Kalaim should have all have been Chayvas Karka, right? It applies to land, but there's exceptions there. But basically, the rule would be that it only applies in Israel.
So when we separate challah, that only applies in also.
Yeah, challah outside of Israel is only rabbinic. Yeah. One day. Okay. Help your wife make the challah. Where do we know this from? Where do we know there's a distinction between things that are obligated on the land and obligated on the body, that it's inside Israel, outside of Israel. It's a very fundamental mesechta, this Kiddushin. You have these laws that are like relevant to the whole Torah. It's not just like marriage. Especially these last few pages. These are the pasuk says Ela chukim hamishpatim asher tishmron laseis baaretz kol hayamim asher timchaim al adam. Okay, so it starts off like this. The Gemara translates each word. These are the laws Ela midrashos. These are the teachings that you get from the psukim. Hamishpatim. These are the laws. Elo adinim. These are what's learned out. Other types of laws probably learned out from Gzeir Shava or something. Asher tishmron, that you should keep. Zumishna, this means to study. You have to study them. If you don't study, then you don't know what to do. Lases, this means that you should guard. How do you guard it? By studying. Lases, to do. Zumaisa, this means that you have to actually fulfill it. Ba'aretz, in the land. Yachol kol mitzvahs kulan layel nagan ba'aretz. Maybe all the mitzvahs only apply to the land of Israel. That's interesting.
All the mitzvahs in general.
Yeah. All the days that you live on the land. The discussion here. If we're learning from Kol Hayamim or Atem Chayim, or we're learning from Ala Adama. But anyway, Ikol Hayam is, so that means even if you're not in the land of Israel, right? As long as you live, you have to keep them even if you're not in Israel. Maybe it should apply even outside of Israel. It says no, in the land. It means in Israel. So no, one second, what's going on over here? You have a riba, an inclusion, means outside of Israel. You have a miyat that says ba'aretz, only in Israel. So tzeyilmad mimasha amar binyan. So now we have to look at what it says in the next.
Here you can have a miyat that's only if you live in the land, not in space.
You have to keep the Torah up there.
Yeah.
On the plane.
Plane, I'm coming down again.
So
Space station.
Look at what it says. Okay, it says right after that you have to destroy the places where they worship the idols. It's an obligation on the person. We know that it doesn't matter where a person is, he's obligated not to worship idols. But it applies even outside the land of Israel. So what we're going to say is like this. Because it says Asher Etem Chaim Al Adam, which means anywhere, even outside of Israel. And then it goes on and it says destroy the idols, which means that what mitzvahs would apply everywhere? The ones that are similar to destroying the idols, which are things that are on the body. Things that are on the body. However, anything that's on the land, that would be only ba'aretz, only in the land of Israel. Only the agricultural laws will only be in the land. Now, Rashi says over here that we're learning this from one of the Yud Gimel Midas, which is Davar Halamid Minyanai. Since in this section it says about destroying the idols, so that's teaching me that what this is talking about is things that are similar to that. Okay. Other commentaries say that this is from one of the other of the 13 ways, and they say it's it didn't have to mention Avodah Zarah. It mentions Avodah Zarah. That teaches me that it's all of them are talking about only things that are similar to it, which means that it's an obligation on the person, not an obligation on the land. Okay.
But the person is not or he is.
So if it's obligation on the person, then it could be even if it's in America. It's obligation on the land, like for example, Truma Meiser, then it's only in Israel. The exception to this is Arla and Kalayim, is first fruits and forbidden mixtures of fruits. Okay. So the Gemara has a question, Rabbi Eliezer, Lakula Palag or Lachumra Palag? Is Rabbi Eliezer being lenient or is he being strict? When he says Af Chadash, is he throwing it onto the rule or is he throwing it onto the exception? So the Gemara starts off. By the way, this question is like 10 lines, so you have to hold on to this It just elaborates on the question a little bit. L'chumra palig, do we say that it's talking about that he's being strict and he's throwing it onto the exception that Orla and Kalayim apply outside the land of Israel, so too Chadash applies outside of Israel. This is what the Tanakama is saying. Chutz min Orla min Kalayim, except for Orla and Kalayim, this is the Tanakama, not Rabbi Eliezer. This is the lenient opinion. The Hilchasa Gemirila, we have Allah Lameshim Misinai, that Orla and Kalayim apply outside the land of Israel. Even though you could say that it's applicable to the land, it's an obligation on the land, and it should not apply outside of Israel. Okay, but nevertheless, we have that Hilchas Gemirla. Aval Chadash, but when it comes to the new grain, it's only in the land of Israel. And my timer, Rabbi Lezer would be Lachumra. So far, the Tanakama is the Kula. My timer, why would it only apply in Israel? Maishav, it says in the pasuk, whatever it says, Maishav Seichem, Lechem V'Kali V'Kal Maishav Seichem. It says Maishav, which is referring to La'achar Yerusha V'Yeshiva Mashma. Now, when it says your dwelling, from your dwelling place, what is it coming to tell me? Is it coming to tell me wherever you live? Or is it coming to tell me after you settle the land? You see, there were 14 years when the land wasn't settled. So it could be it's giving me a minor detail. It's telling me when did the laws start in the land of Israel, 14 years after you enter, after everyone has this inheritance. Because they have to divide it up, who's getting what, all the shvatim. So the word Maishav in the Gemara, there's a machlekes, what is telling me? Is it telling me that it's only referring to the land of Israel? And why are you telling me the dwelling place? You're telling me that it only takes place after 14 years? Or is it telling me everywhere where I live, even outside the land of Israel? So that's the machlekes. Tanakamba would learn that when it says Maishav by Chadash, it's referring to the land of Israel. And it's only after 14 years. Lacher Yushav Yeshiva. Basar Rabbi Lezer Lemeiman, Rabbi Lezer comes along to say, L'chumra, Af Chadash Noig Bein Baretz Bein B'chutzlaretz. Chadash applies even outside the land of Israel. My time, what's he going to do with the word Maishav? My time, Maishav B'chol Makom Shatim Yeshvim. And Maishav means wherever you live, even New York or wherever. Okay. Or maybe Lakula Palik. Maybe Rabbi Lezer is saying the leniency. And what the Tanakama was saying is that Chutz min Olav Kalayim Del Chesed Lava Kolshkin Chadash, the Moshev Kol Makom Shatim Yeshim Mashma. Arlen Kalayim is Halach Lameshim Misinai. And of course Chadash applies everywhere because it says Moshev. Moshev means wherever you dwell. It comes along Rabbi Lezer and says that Chadash only applies to the land of Israel because it's referring to Achar Yerusha Yeshiva. It's referring to in the 14 years, but it's only in Israel, but just 14 years later. So we have two ways of reading that pasuk, and based on that, we're going to be able to. We'll have to figure out what Rabbi Eliezer really holds. The Gemara says if that's the case, that Rabbi Eliezer is really being lenient and saying that it only applies to Israel, and the Tanakama is being strict. It says it applies even outside the land of Israel. So what does Rabbi Eliezer mean when he says af, my af? What does he mean also? It sounds like he's adding on a strict rule. Where it says no, af akamaisa. He's going back to what the Tanakama said, that they say that it doesn't apply to outside the land of Israel. Before we get to the exceptions, it comes along Rabbi Eliezer and says, this also doesn't apply outside the land of Israel. Right? As opposed to what the Tanakama, that it does apply outside the land. They're saying it also doesn't apply, going back before the exception.
Still in the question.
Kamaisa. That's the end of the question. Tashima, come and listen. Going to get a proof to try to answer the ta means come, right? Asa. So the Amar Abaya says, it's interesting that we're going to get a proof from something that Abaya says. Man Tana de Palagala de Rabbi Lezer. Who is the Tanakama? Tanakama, we don't have the name for the Tanakama. They're just anonymous. Usually it's Rameir, right? Over here, Rabbi says the opinion of the Tanakama is Rabbi Yishmael. It says it's Rabbi Yishmael. Sometimes the Gemara says if it's not Rameir, the Gemara will elaborate sometimes and say who it really is. It says Rabbi Yishmael. The Tanya was started in a brisa. The brisa says Lamdcha shekol makom shnemer by Moshe ve'ein alachi Yushi v'shiva div Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael's opinion is that whenever it says Moshev, it's referring to Lacha Yerushi v'shiva after 14 years. after the 14 years, which means that the word Maishav Tzugazant is referring to the land of Israel. Now, what we're talking about over here is the Nesachim. Nesachim are the libations, the pouring of the wine and the mixing of the oil and flour that's done together with sacrifices. Now, what happened was after the spies, Pasha Shlach, after they were told that they're not going into Eretz Yisrael, I think Hashem tells them that you're not going in for 40 years, but here's a halacha when you get into Eretz Yisrael. Here's so it's at least one of the ways to learn. Yeah, but when you get in, you have to bring these libations. Okay, well, comes along Rabbi Shmuel and says that it's only after the 14 years. It says in your dwelling, which means that it's in Israel, according to Rabbi Shmuel, but it's only after the 14 years of settling. Yeah, not after Yeshua, but after 14 years into Yeshua's reign, his leadership.
It was about 14 years.
Yeah. 7 years to conquer, 7 years to divide. During that time, the Mishkan, I think, was in Gilgal or something, and they had an altar there. And even though they had an altar, but you didn't have to bring the Nesachim together with private sacrifices. They also had private altars. Until they had the Mishkan Shiloh, they were allowed to have private altars. You just bring a sacrifice in your backyard. But you didn't need to bring Nesachim on the private altar. And according to Rabbi Shmuel, you didn't need to bring it on the even on the public altar until it was settled. Well, Rabbi Akiva says to him, that was the Rabbi Shmuel. Amalei Rabbi Akiva argues with Rabbi Shmuel often. Akiva says, Hari Shabbos by Shabbos v'nagas bein baretz bein b'chutzlaretz. What about Shabbos? Shabbos it says Maishav. What's the pasuk? Leisivaru eish b'chol meish v'seichem. You're done not to make a fire in all your dwelling places. And it's not only in Israel after the 14 years. It must be that applies everywhere. So Amalei, Shabbos, you have to add in a mem. Mikal v'chaymer asya. Shabbos, I know anyway, applies everywhere. You can't prove from that. Ma mitzvah kalis na'igus bein baretz bein b'chutzlaretz. If there's minor laws that apply outside the land of Israel, so Shabbos chamir lekolshkin Shabbos, which is so strict, for sure would apply outside of the land of Israel. Now, midamar Abaya, from the fact that Abaya says, Man tana de palagala de Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Shmuel.
Dangerous.
Yeah.
We could think of a lot of
Right.
Does it define mitzvah kala?
Sorry?
Does this define anywhere mitzvah kala?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. I don't know.
I didn't hear.
I'm not sure. So, from the fact that Abaya says that who's the Tana that argues with Rabbi Eliezer? Who's the first Tana, the Tana Kama? Who is that? That's Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel holds that it's only in the land. So it must be saying that Chadash is only in the land of Israel. And comes along Rabbi Eliezer to say that it's outside the land of Israel, right? He has to, if he's arguing, he has to be saying something different. So Shmamina Rabbi Eliezer l'chumra palig Shmamina. Obviously, Rabbi Eliezer is arguing and he's being strict, saying that Chadash applies outside the land of Israel. Why is it that we're not so careful with Chadash? Or some of us aren't? If it's a big machlokes if it what the halach is, but the leniency comes from a Bach that says that if the land doesn't belong to Jewish people, so outside the land of Israel you can be lenient. That's where the leniency comes from. And then there's a statement from the Baal Shem Tov that you can rely on the Bach. That's why the Chassidim that they're usually strict about everything.
Yeah.
Somehow they rely on the Bach. I think it had to do with more what was available and looking for, And recently there was a revival of, everyone should be strict about this. It's a real issue. It's a major. It's not like some people came up with a chumrah. It's not a minor one. This is like a very serious one. But anyway, it's so it is. Okay. Michti. Let's see. Rabbi Yishmael Ahechakai. What's Rabbi Yishmael referring to? What was he talking about when he said that it's talking about after the 14 years of the conquering and dividing the land? It says on the Nesachim, talking about these libations that were poured together with the offering. So B'Nesachim, the problem is B'Nesachim Bio Maishav Ksivdahu. Over there it says two things. It says first of all, when you come into land, Ki Yaviyacha, Ki what's the pasuk? Ki Savayo Alart. Ki Savayo Alart. And it also says when you're Mishvesechem. It also says where you're settling. So maybe I need two expressions to tell me that it's in the land of Israel. So, Achikamar, this is what he's saying. Rabbi Shmuel is telling him that anywhere where it says those two expressions, it's only in the land of Israel. If that's the case, if that you really need the two expressions and not just one expression of Maishav, so Amar le Rabbi Akiva, Rishabish Nemar by Meshabbos, Ramalei Shabbos Kalvachaymeri, the whole conversation doesn't fit because Rabbi Akiva says, what about Shabbos? Shabbos also says Maishav, and Rabbi Yishmael says, I have a Kalvachaymer for you. Why does he have to say a Kalvachaymer? He could have said, Nemalei, Anabiyo Maishav Kamina. I said you need two words, and you're asking me about one word. That's not what I said. He didn't have to even tell him a Kalvachaymer. Could have just told him you're missing the other phrase that I said is necessary. So the Gemara says Chadavait Kamar. Rabbi Shmuel actually told him 2 points. First of all, Chadadana Biyomaishav Kamina. First of all, that's not what I said. And second of all, Vaid the Kamra Terei Shabbos Shnemer Meshavis Shabbos Kalvachaymer. And even if you were gonna say different, so Shabbos anyways, I have a Kalvachaymer. Okay. Yeah, that's sort of like what they say. How come? What's this week's parsha? Hazino. How come there's a big Zion in Hazino? Why is there a big Zion? Why is the someone cut it? So there's big letters. So how come there's a big Zion? Someone said it's not big. He says, oh, that's one teretz. That's what this sounds like a little bit. It's not what he said. It's like, oh, that's another point. Okay. Anyway. Okay, but my kamiflagi. What are they arguing about? We have to go back to the Machlekes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. It says the Kirvu Nesachim Bamidbar Kamifli. They're arguing about a historical discussion of when someone would bring a sacrifice in the desert. Did they pour wine together with that sacrifice? It's a historical question.
Didn't they pour it by the Elazar?
It says they poured wine there.
I think so.
Uh-huh. So maybe they considered that a public sacrifice. Anyway, so it goes like this. Rabbi Shmuel Sabra like Kirvan Asachim Bamidbar. Rabbi Shmuel holds they did not bring wine. They did not pour wine in the desert. Now we do find that they did. Elastamid, that says that they did pour by the public sacrifice they did. We're talking about the private sacrifice. Rabbi Akiva says no. They even brought it for the individuals. They also brought wine. Now, what comes out from that? So, if they brought it in the desert, so then, according to Rabbi Akiva, then when it says that you bring it in the land, so they brought it in the desert also. So it must mean anywhere. When it says in your dwelling places, it must mean everywhere because they brought it even in the desert. According to Rabbi Shmuel, that they didn't bring it in the desert. It says only when you come to your place of settlement, Maishav, that would mean only in Eretz Yisrael you bring it. Amar Abaya. Abaya says, Hi Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, Mapik Meidach Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel. These two Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, this Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel is associated with another Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel. It says like this. Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, there was another Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel that says, Hayil v'nemar bias b'teirastam. It says, sometimes it says, when you will enter. And then I have one case where it says that la'achar Yerusha v'yeshiva. One of them says when you come into the land and you'll conquer it and you'll settle it. So afkal la'achar Yerusha v'yeshiva. Therefore, every time it says Meishav, it's always talking about la'achar Yerusha v'yeshiva after you conquer it and settle it. Now, which what is this? How does this work? This is not a kala prat. This is
that's
no. That's kala prat is when I have like anytime you find an aveda of you find something of your brother that's lost, sure, hamar, ser, whatever, then you that would be a kala prat. Okay, so where is this one detail where we find it? It has to do with the king. With when it says about appointing a king, it says kisavi alarts v'yirishti v'marta simalai melech, and you will say, I want to appoint a king. Okay, the mitzvah of making a king when they come into the land of Israel. Be'idach, what does the other opinion hold? Because you're right, by melech it's only after Yerushi Yeshiva. And also Bikurim is only after Yerushi, is only after they settled the land. And once I have two precedents, I can't learn from the two. Remember we had before? Because if it was really a precedent, then you would only need one. V'idach, what's the other opinion? Tzrichi, it says that I needed both of those. If I would have had only one of them, then I wouldn't have been able to have the other one. So that's why I needed both. So it's not considered two. It's considered each one as an individual. Because of Rahman and Melech, like us Bikurim, if it would have only said the king, that would start after Yerusha Yeshiva 14 years later. Hava, I mean, the Bikurim, the Kamasani Lalter, but the Bikurim, the first fruits, they'd say, look, you're already eating, right? You're picking fruits and berries off the trees. You didn't start, plowing and all of that, but you're still eating. You should bring Bikurim right away. So the friend has to tell me that Bikurim is only after 14 years. Because of Bikurim, and if it would have said Bikurim is after 14 years, like Melech wouldn't have said that you appoint a king after 14 years. I could have thought, I need a king right now. We're going to battle. We should appoint a king right away. So it has to tell me that the king is only after 14 years, only after conquering, dividing, settling, then you appoint a king.
Like, what's the quote that says?
And how do they divide it? Who's on top?
It was done by a girl, and I think there was also the Urim and Tumim that was involved.
It was a double.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
I was trying to find this verse that talks.
Rashi quotes the verse that was referring to the king that says Kisavayo alart when you come into the land, and you will inherit it and settle it, and you'll say appoint a king for us.
It's strange because it's like future tense. It's like
Yeah.
It's like what if we don't say?
Yeah, maybe it means and if you will say appoint the king, because we see by Shmuel he was a little upset about the king.
Right.
Very upset.
I had the. I think what I learned was it was the intention. Like it's mitzvah to have a king, but for what reason?
Right.
Is it if you want to be like all the other?
Right. My understanding of it is that appointing a king does not solve the problems. You have to. There's always things that you have to change. People feel like, oh, we're going to get a king, everything's going to be different now. No, you're always going to need to do work. They thought like external things. Oh, when I move, everything's going to be good. When I get a new car, everything's going to change. Doesn't work like that. The Shmuel, I think, was upset. Shmuel was upset. You think you're going to change by just some external thing? There's going to be a new president. Everything's going to be better. Okay. Okay. The other opinion would say, says actually, I don't need both of those to be said because it could just say the king and I don't need Bikurim. But now Amina, and I would say, I would say like this, just like the king that I only appoint the king after I conquer and everything. Bikurim like Kolshkin, for sure Bikurim I would only need to do after I conquer. Okay. the king that you would have thought that you want to right away. You still don't do it right away. Never, so bikurim for sure. V'idach, what does the other one say? That's logic. Iksavachi, if it would have said just the king, I would have thought that just like challah, the challah you do right away. Challah is an exception. That applied right away when they came into the land. Yeah, challah is very unique from all of these laws. It's the only one that applies right away. Right when they came into the land of Israel, they already had to do separate challah. Kamash Malan, it comes to teach me that it needs to say it. It needs that it's only after the 14 years of conquering and settling. Bahashta da Amrit. Now that we've said that it applies to both Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz, anything that's on the person's body. It's not doesn't have to do with the land. Moishav de Kasav Rachmana Gabi Shabbos Lamali. Why does it have to say Moishav? Gemara is going to go through a bunch of questions like about this. It says Itzchach. Now we're going to do a bunch of these here. We'll go to the bottom of the page. We'll leave it. It's necessary to say it. Why? Because Shabbos, it says in the area when it talks about the holidays, if you buy Kiddush Kimaydas, I could have thought that maybe I need Besdin to sanctify the Shabbos as well. Kamash Malan, it comes to tell me that it just happens automatically without the Besdin. Moishav the Kasar Rachmana Gabi Chela V'Dam Lamali. Why does it need to say Moishav your in your dwelling places by Chela V'Dam? I know that it's anything that's not on the land. Chela is forbidden fats and Dam is eating blood. Why does it have to say in your land? It's coming to teach me since it says Chela V'Dam in the section that talks about karbanos. So I could have thought Bismandika karban it's Chela V'Dam. It's only when you have karbanos you're not allowed to eat the chelav and the dam. Bismandaleka carbon life. When you don't have the carbon, then it's no problem to eat it. Kamashman comes to tell me no, wherever you're dwelling, that it applies as well. Remember that very interesting Ibn Ezra, where he's arguing with the Karaite. Karaite says, how come you're allowed to eat the tail of a sheep if that's something that's brought on the altar, the fat tail? So he tells him back, oh, the chelav is only on the things that are when there's karbanos. When there's no karbanos, it doesn't apply. Anyway, he tells him like some story that's totally not our tradition. And then the Karaite says back to him, he says, oh, Moshe Emes, Mr. Rasei Emes, he agreed. It's Pashas Tzav. It's like anyway. Okay, Moshe the Kasar Rachmana Gabi Matzah Marar. What about the what it says about Matzah Marar? It says in your dwelling place. You don't need that. You don't need the word Moshe. Because I know that it's on Chayvas Aguf. It's on the person. It's not an agricultural law. Lamali, what does it need to say? It's Yitzchak. It needs to say it's that you have to eat the carbon Pesach together with Matzah Mara. Bismandika Pesach in, Bismandika Pesach Loi. Only when you have a carbon Pesach, you have to do it Kamashman. So it says Moshev. That means wherever you are, even if you're not in the land. The Kasar Rachmana Gabi Tfilin Upetach Amar Lamali. Why does it say when you come via Kiviyacha when you come into the land for Tfilin? Ahumi Boyele. Look at the Tana de Rabbi Shmuel. That we need for Tana de Rabbi Shmuel. Why? Because it says Rabbi Tana, the teaching from the Yeshiva Rabbi Shmuel says, Asay mitzvah zu, fulfill this mitzvah, shebeshvila tikanis laaretz. That because of this, you're going to come into the land.
So it's saying that.
So tefillin is going to help us come into the land. That's why the Rebbe is the tefillin campaign. Big deal. Okay. The next Gemara would take us through the next page. Let's leave it. Okay.